Hello, and welcome to FACT's webinar, Advocating for Higher Welfare Farming in the New Administration. What's next post-election? Our guest presenters are the amazing Shannon and the wonderful Adam Mason. I'm Samantha Gasson, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating this session. Thank you for joining us. Before we dive right in, let me take a minute or two to do a few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization that works to ensure that all food-producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers through our humane farming program, promoting policies that make foods from animals safe and healthy to eat through our Safe and Healthy Foods program, and generally help consumers make more informed food choices. Our Fund to Farmer grants applications are now open. They are tentatively going to be closing December 8th, but we might end up extending that depending on how many applications we get. And our mentorship program is now open as well. And that's an absolutely amazing program. You can visit our website at foodanimalconcerns.trust.org to learn more about all our farmer services. I'd also like to take a second to introduce my wonderful colleague, Catherine Hoke, who will be in the wings to help out in case of any technical difficulties. Thank you, Catherine. At this time, I really, really am delighted to introduce our esteemed presenters, Shannon and Adam Mason. Is the Director of Farm Animal Welfare Policy for the ASPCA, where she leads the organization's state and federal policy work to end factory farming, reduce farm animal suffering, and support higher welfare farmers like you guys as part of the transition towards a more humane food system. A New York native, earned her bachelor's degree in environment and development from McGill University and a JD and certificate in food and agricultural law from Vermont Law School. Lives in Montpelier, Vermont with her scruffy rescue dog, Luna. I love that. Adam Mason is the Senior Manager of Farm Animal Welfare and Environmental Policy at the ASPCA, working to advance policies to improve farm animal welfare. Phase out factory farms and invest in farmers implementing more humane and welfare certified farming practices. An Iowa native, Adam earned his bachelor's degree in political science in German, which I think is interesting, from Central College in Pilla, Iowa. He lives in Des Moines, Iowa with his wife, Anna, rescue dog Towns, and adopted cat, Jasmine. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let this dynamic duo take over. And I think I'm sharing with Kara first.
Yes.
Or letting Kara share first.
Yeah, sorry. We'll do a screen share swap. So we've got our presentation up there. Thank you, Sam, for the lovely introduction as ever. And it wouldn't be the ASPCA if we didn't mention our pets in our bios. So
I love it. I love it.
So thanks everyone for coming today again. As Sam mentioned, I'm sure you're all a little bit sick of hearing about the election, so I appreciate that everyone has taken the time to come hear more about it today. And Adam and I are, although also a little bit sick of it, excited to talk to this group about what's to come in the next 4 years and how you all can get involved. So you've already met us, but here's Adam and I will be talking to you all today. And I just want to give a little overview of what we're going to touch on. We've got time for Q&A at the end, but since this is a pretty small group, if folks want to put questions in either the chat or the Q&A as it goes, Adam and I can try and answer things throughout the presentation. It doesn't need to be so formal, so feel free to ask them, but know that we're holding time at the end to take questions. So we're going to start with just kind of an overview of how farming and policy intersect. And then another overview of what's to expect from the Trump administration over the next 4 years. And then I'm going to hand it over to Adam, who's going to talk about what on earth is happening with the Farm Bill and what the next actions will be there and how you all can get involved in that process. So, I think policy can feel very far away from our day-to-day lives. And I think maybe even particularly so for farmers like yourselves who are out doing important things with your hands and out on the land, and policy is far away in DC, or even far away, in your own state capitals. It feels quite nebulous. So I just wanted to kind of speak to all the ways that actually policy makes a big difference in farming in particular, and what farmers grow and how products are processed, how they are transported and marketed and sold, and at the end of the day, often what farmers get for price at the price point for their products. So again, I won't cover all of it because it gets down into things as nitty-gritty as, like zoning laws, but I wanted to cover some of the big buckets that are also the things that tend to come into play in big policy conversations like the Farm Bill. So one that I'm sure many folks are familiar with are subsidies. The government spends billions of dollars on subsidies, whether that's in the form of direct payments or insurance, and most of those are going to support commodity crops like corn and soybean. And as a result, the folks who benefit from those are mostly bigger industrial operators that are using those crops to feed their animals at a much reduced price. So that's a space where there's a lot of room for change and reform that could pretty drastically change what farming looks like in this country. Another is conservation programs, which many farmers on this call may have interacted with at one point or another. It's a sliver of funding relative to what we spend in the Farm Bill, but it's one of the most meaningful ways that we can support farmers who are implementing climate smart practices, regenerative grazing, whatever that is. Unfortunately, a lot of the time these programs are pretty chronically underfunded, and also the funding doesn't always go to the things that I think most folks would consider to be meaningful conservation practices. One of the programs that we hear a lot about in that vein in particular is the EQIP program, which folks may be familiar with. It's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, supposed to give grants to farmers who are implementing meaningful conservation projects on their farms, but actually a lot of that money ends up funding things like manure lagoons and biogas digesters, animal mortality sheds, just directly funneling more money into industrial agriculture. So that's a space where there's, again, a lot of room for reform to make things better for higher welfare farmers in particular. Another policy space that I think folks interact with every day, even though they might not think about where it all comes back to, is labeling and advertising regulation. The federal government regulates what can and can't be said on meat and poultry packaging, and unfortunately they don't do a great job at the moment of ensuring that those labels aren't misleading. Specifically labels like natural and humanely raised have no set definition. Big companies can pretty much use them as they'd like to, and unfortunately that really disadvantages truly higher welfare producers, because those same labels can be used on both of those products, and of course the industrial product is going to be a much lower price point. So that's, again, another space where there's a lot of room for reform. And folks may have noticed FACT was just helpful. The USDA just had a comment period that closed yesterday. They're somewhat reforming how some of these labels are regulated. Again, they don't go quite far enough, but progress is slowly being made. So those are the big three. And then I just want to, again, mention these ones that I think are ones we're likely to see more of over the next 4 years, just because of what's going on kind of in the broader space. Emergency assistance programs, obviously with more extreme weather, disasters. We've got folks in North Carolina on this call. There's been a greater incidence of those events going on, in addition to the continued spread of avian influenza. We've seen a lot of farms needing to depopulate animals, losing animals in those disasters. And unfortunately, the current setup makes it so basically the farms that do no preparation for those types of events, the big industrial farms who have tens of thousands, sometimes of animals in barns, and if there's, say, a weather disaster like we just saw in North Carolina, what they're going to do is absolutely nothing. They're going to leave those animals there. All those animals are likely to die, but they know that they're going to get reimbursed by the government for those losses. Whereas so many North Carolina farmers we saw did everything in their power to move their animals to higher ground, everything in their power to save them. But the way our current policy is set up disincentivizes that. So lots of room for reform there. And then labor and environmental regulations are huge, major impacts, obviously, on farmers. There's a lot of immigrant and undocumented labor in agriculture. And I think we'll likely see a lot of movement in that space in the next 4 years. And then environmental regulations. Again, this is a place where industrial agriculture gets a big free pass from being regulated as they should, like any other industry. And again, that just tips the scales in their favor over higher welfare farmers. So lots of big buckets. Again, we could talk about this for the whole hour, but I just wanted to mention kind of the big ones. And let me make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat here. Okay. So the next 4 years, our Trump administration. I want to start this by looking, unlike sometimes with the new administration, we actually have some history to look back on. Trump was already in office for 4 years. So I wanted to talk through some of the things that that administration did in that time, in kind of 2 buckets or 2 themes. One is, and a theme I think we'll likely see continue, is a lot of decreased regulations of industry in general, but that applies to agriculture. And then perhaps surprisingly, there's actually quite a lot of spending on agriculture in Trump's administration previously. Obviously, that was impacted because we had a global pandemic happen, and so we don't know if it'll hold up the same the next 4 years. But some things worth noting that happened last time. One of the Trump administration's very first moves when they got into office was to revoke the organic animal welfare rule, which folks on this call might be familiar with. That rule was over a decade in the making, and just because of the timing, it had been finalized in basically the last hours of the Obama administration. So it was somewhat easy. There still were steps they had to take, but easier for the Trump administration to overturn it. Since that time, the Biden administration did go on to implement and finalize a new organic animal welfare rule that will be in effect come January 2nd of 2025. So it'll be in effect before Trump takes office. So if there are plans to revoke that rule again, it will be much more difficult because they'll be trying to revoke a final effective rule. I've yet to see any indication from the administration that that's in their plan, but again, they did it last time around, so there's a chance that we'll see something like that again. Another one of the places that they decreased regulations in a big way is around slaughter line speeds in particular. The administration made it easier for, at first, just pork slaughter plants, but then towards the end of their administration, poultry to slaughter animals beyond existing regulatory limits. Slaughter line speeds in industrial slaughterhouses are already incredibly fast. To give you an example of what we're talking about, the poultry plants originally were capped at slaughtering 140 birds per minute. And these waivers allow them to slaughter up to 175. I think these are speeds that you can't even quite wrap your brain around. It's incredibly quick. Obviously, that has implications on animal welfare, but also the workers in the plants. Overall, something we would say not great, not a great move by the administration. Another thing we saw a lot of was removing USDA records from public view. Generally, the USDA publishes humane slaughter violations, also Animal Welfare Act violations on their website, so folks can go and see whoever has had a violation. The previous Trump administration removed pretty much all of those records from public view, so there's a chance we'll see more like that happen in the coming years. And another big move they did was they dissolved the independent GIPSA office, which is the office that deals with regulating anti-competitive and unfair practices in agriculture. I'm sure folks might be familiar with some ongoing rulemaking around that, around fair contracts in agriculture. So there's, again, a chance we'll see more moves like that. And then again, the Trump administrations gave out more payments to farmers than any previous administration had. Again, a lot of that was colored by the COVID pandemic. Most of that went out through the Corona Food Assistance Program payments, the majority of which went to large industry, but there's a chance that we could see similar kind of levels of funding in one way or the other. And of course, one of the biggest shows of, so I guess you could call it support, certainly the helping industry, was during COVID when they passed the order to ensure that slaughterhouses stayed open, which was very much a handout to some of those big companies at the time. So 2 themes: decreased regulation and general support or spending in favor of agriculture. So what to expect now for the second term? So the US Senate now has a Republican majority. They flipped the Senate, and there's still about 12 seats in the House up in the air. So we're unsure if they'll have that majority there, but assuming that Republicans do take the House, the Trump administration is really going to have very few obstacles in moving forward their policy agenda. And unlike the first term, this is technically Trump's last bite at the apple, assuming they don't attempt to alter the Constitution to remove term limits on presidents. This is his last go. So I think that's also something to be noted, that again, there's really nothing to lose in here for them. There's no election to win again. So they're kind of incentivized to really throw everything they've got out there and try and do the most. So again, this is all a best guess. This is conjecture. There's so much, we have to appoint folks to all the offices. It's going to depend again on how big that House majority is, lots of things. But based on things the administration has already said, things that are in their Project 2025 transition document, this is the types of things we can probably plan to see in the second term. The first kind of bucket of things is in that theme of America First, the aggressive tariffs that the administration has promised could potentially impact agriculture producers in a pretty big way, by increasing price of products, both import and export. I'm not a tariff professional here, there's definitely kind of a big bubble that could have a big impact depending on what tariffs are set and on what. Additionally, deportations could play a pretty big role in impacting farm labor across the country. We could see some ripple effects out from that. In the theme of continued deregulation, the administration has already talked to a couple of things that they're hoping to do. Their theory of change is that deregulating markets is generally better for farmers and would improve consolidation. I think that's up for debate, but again, I think we could see another potential gut to things like GIPSA and offices that do that type of regulatory work. Their Project 2025 document also points to wanting to do some reform on marketing orders and checkoff programs. Folks are probably familiar with the checkoff programs, which have actually seen some criticism from the left as well. This is kind of a bipartisan issue here, that checkoff reform is needed. So that's I would say a positive thing that we could see coming in the next 4 years.
Hey, Cara, could you go over what the checkoff programs are? Because I don't know that everyone's familiar.
Yes, and I hope I say this correctly, and Adam, feel free to chime in. But generally, checkoff works that farmers pay into checkoff programs, normally based, I believe, on products or animals sold. Adam's nodding at me. So like the beef checkoff program, you sell however many beef, and it's not a lot per animal, but it certainly adds up. Farmers are spending hundreds, sometimes thousands. Obviously, the bigger folks are spending or paying in probably hundreds of thousands of dollars into the checkoff program. And the checkoff programs are meant to essentially help market those products. So the beef checkoff would be helping you market beef. Where's the beef campaigns are a beef checkoff program result. Got Milk is a result of the dairy checkoff program. But generally, folks would argue, one, that those big campaigns like that are really only helping commodity and conventional producers. They aren't helping smaller, higher welfare or pasture-based producers compete in the market in any meaningful way. But also checkoff dollars have been used on lobbyists, which is where most folks call for the most reform, because those are lobbyists who are, again, going to the federal government and lobbying for things that are overwhelmingly benefiting industrial agriculture over independent, higher welfare farmers. Adam, did I miss anything to add?
I would just say the real rub there too, exactly like you just said, Kara, is that a lot of times that lobbying agenda benefits industrial scale operations, and these are mandatory programs. So producers are required to pay into them. And we've seen numerous attempts over the last 25 years to reverse that, to make those checkoffs more like a voluntary program, so that producers would have the option of whether or not they pay into those checkoff funds.
So I have a question. I've always wondered about this. When do you pay into that? Because I've never voluntarily paid into it. Is it charged at the slaughterhouse? So when you go to the processor, do they charge? Are they responsible for turning it in? Because I sell beef, pork, and, chicken as well, but I slaughter at home. So I don't know when I've as far as I know, I've never paid into it.
Adam, do you know the answer to that? I do think it comes out of things like processing and slaughter fees generally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So I was paying into it, just didn't know I was.
I believe so.
Got it.
Again, we should have come prepared with better knowledge of the checkoff programs, but yeah, generally I think it's coming, especially because often you're paying by, like again with cows, it's by animal, so that's easiest done at the end. Yeah, but of course, like Sam, if you're doing all your poultry on farm, then there's nothing to be paying in there. Okay, so and then this final bullet is kind of a cautiously optimistic chance of some support for regenerative pasture-based farming. Again, we're still very early into what the administration's transition is going to look like, but some of the early conversations about advisors to the USDA have included names like Joel Salatin, which folks on this call might be familiar with. Joel's one of kind of the early figures out in front of pasture poultry production, and a very staunch kind of advocate for that type of farming and particularly against industrial farming. So that's, you know, potentially if that's the type of person who's in their ear, we could see all kinds of, you know, great reform coming out of the agency. Hard to say. Again, none of that is confirmed at this point. But on the same side of the coin, this is also an administration that's generally unfavorable towards government spending on climate smart projects, as well as things like supporting farmers transitioning to organic. So these are kind of two ships passing in the night, unsure which one's going to win out at the end of the day, but I think a bit of cautious optimism that we might see some support for higher welfare farmers and generally for independent farmers overall. Again, all to be determined. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Adam to talk more about what is happening with the Farm Bill and what to do from here.
Right. So thank you, Kara. It's a great overview of what we have coming up potentially over the next 4 years. But what about right now? And what about the Farm Bill? So just a quick refresher, you know, we've had a Farm Bill since the Great Depression back in the 30s. And they are renewed every 5 years. The Farm Bill obviously has a lot to do in dictating all of those policies that Kara was talking about. It also governs food and nutrition programs, things like rural broadband, forestry programs, a really wide swath of policy impacting our rural communities. And currently, the Farm Bill's expired. This isn't exactly new. It's happened before, right? In fact, our previous Farm Bill that went into effect on December 20th, 2018 was about a year late in being renewed. It should have been renewed in 2017, but Congress passed an extension to give themselves more time to work on that. However, we're in a somewhat unique situation where this year, that extension that they passed last year in 2023 to extend the 2018 Farm Bill because they couldn't come to an agreement on that Farm Bill policy has expired again. It has expired again this September. And right now, where we're at, as you can see on the slide there, that the extension expired on September 30th again this year. If Congress does not pass another Farm Bill before the end of the year, lots and lots of Farm Bill programs will essentially stop. And that's everything from those subsidy programs, the nutrition programs. It will have the potential to really disrupt our food and farming system as we know it. Now, what we've been hearing from folks up on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. is that they're working, the House of Representatives has passed their House Republican version of the Farm Bill out of the House Agriculture Committee, but it hasn't come up for a vote on the full House floor. Similarly, the Senate Agriculture Committee has released a framework, but they haven't taken up an actual bill. One of two things could happen. We could see a Farm Bill that's really rushed and kind of cobbled together in these last couple of weeks before the end of the year and voted on and hopefully passed, or we could see another extension. All of that said, because of the election results, there's a lot of political motivations for legislators to get to work on this. Like I said, they either have to pass an extension or a new Farm Bill before the end of the year, or else our food and farm system will be severely disrupted. So that's kind of where we are. And this means that we have a huge opportunity to really shape what happens on the Farm Bill right now. Again, whether or not it's an extension or a new farm bill, there's the potential to add riders and other things that can help shape this policy. Here at the ASPCA, we put out a platform for the Farm Bill back in early 2023. And thankfully, a lot of the policies that we were talking about then are still not only applicable, but have been part of the discussion. And so again, this is an opportunity for all of us to continue elevating these policies and to make our voices heard, so that as these discussions are happening in Washington, D.C., we can hopefully end up with the best farm bill possible. Some of those priorities, and I'll make sure we send out the link to this platform in the follow-up, but we wanted to see 4 basic kind of like principles. One is that we just need to increase corporate accountability and address the consolidation that's happened across our food system, right? That means, again, like fully enforcing GIFSA programs, and one that's been top of mind and a key difference between what we've seen in the House and Senate is this dangerous EATS Act. The EATS Act would limit states' ability to regulate agriculture within their own boundaries. It's really targeted at rolling back policies like Proposition 12 in California or Question 3 in Massachusetts. And ultimately would have the potential impact of forcing millions of animals back into cages. So we do not want to see the EATS Act or anything like that included in the Farm Bill. As Kara mentioned, there is a lot of money that's in the Farm Bill, and that has the impact of dictating the direction of our food and farm system. And we've seen this push really over the last 30 plus years, where you might have heard, or 40 plus years at this point, you might have heard the phrase "get big or get out." That's a result of how farm dollar bills are spent. And so we want to see this government investment taken away from factory farming. And we actually have what are called 2 marker bills. Marker bills are policies that we work with Congress people to kind of get introduced, so that we've got messaging bills. We can go to our Congress people and ask them to support these. And then ultimately that policy is already written, so they can just kind of do a copy and paste and plug it right into the Farm Bill. 2 of those that we're really focused on right now are the Industrial Agriculture Accountability Act, so that we stop funding inhumane depopulation programs and essentially face industrial scale operations to kind of pay insurance for the potential risk and loss that they could face. And then also, Kara had mentioned the EQIP Act, and we've heard from numerous farmers that they sometimes have trouble accessing EQIP funding. That's because up to nearly $500,000 can go to one industrial scale operation, as opposed to smaller contracts that would benefit many more pasture-based farmers. So this EQIP Improvement Act would kind of change that and redirect that investment program back into small and mid-sized farmers who are really focused on environmental improvements around their farm. Ultimately, what we really want to see is investment in farmers like you. If those farmers who are committed to building a more humane food and farm system. And that's why we love partnering. In fact, we love working with you all, is that we just need to put more funding into higher welfare practices, and to also provide a safety net or a transition plan for farmers that maybe for some reason have gotten trapped in the industrial system and want to transition out, either to more pasture-based farming practices or into crop and food vegetable production. Lastly, we want to make sure that the Farm Bill is ensuring strong government oversight of industrial animal agriculture. Kara highlighted all of the challenges we could be facing in terms of deregulation. This Farm Bill still gives us an opportunity to lock in some of those protections that we want to see. And one of those, again, would be going directly at the source of the power of the industrial animal ag lobby by reining in that checkoff spending. So those are some of the big policy pieces that we're calling for in the Farm Bill. And if we go to the next slide, we can talk about what you can do. So you have an immense amount of power to help shape the Farm Bill, right? Because as farmers, as producers, you're one of the ones who is most impacted by the Farm Bill. And so your voice really does carry a lot of weight with your elected officials. whether that's if you can make it to Washington, D.C., whether that's talking to USDA officials in D.C. or even in your home state, even your state legislature, right? Where a lot of that Farm Bill funding goes to be actually implemented and put into practice on the ground. So speaking about your challenges, sharing your experiences, sharing what's happening on your farm carries a lot of weight with elected officials. And I've got some exciting news. We're actually looking forward to teaming up. We've been kind of in the planning stages for the last year, but teaming up even more with FACT to build a network of higher welfare farmers like you to really continue advocating for policies that support these more humane farming practices and systems that you're already engaged in. I don't want to give too much away right now because over the next 3 months, Sam and I are going to be reaching out to you. We're going to be holding listening sessions to pull you in, to kind of let you know what we're already thinking and to hear more from you about what you need and how we can build this national grassroots network of farmers who are committed to changing the system and supporting each other along the way as we do it. So I'm really excited about that. Stay tuned for more. And we've got this short window right now where we need to be weighing in on the Farm Bill. So there's lots of stuff you can do. We know that a lot of elected officials, they follow those hometown papers and local publications. A letter to the editor in your local paper can have a huge impact. So lifting out, again, sharing your experiences of that you're facing on your farm and one of those Farm Bill policy priorities that I was talking about can really keep it on your elected officials' radar. If you'd like to submit a letter to the editor, I know Kara and I are more than willing to help you write one, look it over, find a local paper to submit it to. I'm sure you get lots of email action alerts as it is. We've got some of those too. Sharing that out so that you help us reach more farmers like yourself is a great way, again, to show that grassroots support for these common sense policies. And ultimately engaging directly with those lawmakers, emails, phone calls, and actually meeting with their staffers. You know, a lot of times it's the staffers handling those calls that are kind of informing which position their elected official should take. And we've had a lot of success meeting with those legislators. So towards that, we're actually holding a virtual fly-in. A fly-in meaning, we like to call it fly-in, like if you're going to Washington, D.C., but we recognize that this is a very busy time on the farm, and so we wanted to make it as easy as possible. We're organizing farmers around the country in key districts to meet with their legislators and also to meet with key committee staffers. You know, I talked about the House Ag Committee, the Senate Ag Committee. We're going to be pulling together groups of farmers like yourselves to meet with these staffers so that as they are either, again, negotiating the extension or negotiating the final Farm Bill, they're hearing directly from us right as they're working on this. So if you are interested in meeting with your elected officials or would like to be a part of these meetings with key Ag Committee staffers, go ahead and click that link that I just put there in the chat, and that will get you signed up. Kara and I can follow up with you. I can tell you Sam has already volunteered to be a part of this virtual fly-in and will be joining us in some of those meetings. So, again, we're really excited about the timing to hold this week of action in early December. We'll get you all the information that you need ahead of time, help you set up the meetings with your elected officials, willing to join you on those calls as well, or Zoom meetings. And then, we'll have a good time doing it. And again, it'll be part of kind of a group of farmers from across the country that you'll get a chance to interact with. The last thing, just like to plant this seed with you right now, is that we know getting those elected officials out to your farm is also one of the most impactful ways to shape their perceptions of the food and farm system. So again, not the first week of December by any means, but next year we'll be reaching out again because we want to host educational farm tours with you and like-minded farmers to really show some of these elected officials, some of whom maybe have never actually been on a farm before, show them all the work that goes into how you raise your farm animals, all the care and hard work that you put into it.
Hey, Adam, can I add something?
Yes.
So I submitted a letter to the editor for the, about the EATS Act, and Kara and Adam, well, mainly Kara, helped me write that letter because I'd never written an op-ed before, and it was just such a nice process. And I've actually even been to DC with Cara before, and gone and seen well, with ASPCA, it wasn't actually Cara, and been to see my legislators, something I'd never done before. And so they really are amazing when it comes to supporting you if you're trying to do those kinds of things. You want to get more interested in doing those things. And it was fun. I had a really good time with all of it. It was fun, and I want to do more of it. So yeah. So anyway, so if you're nervous about doing any of these things, just know that ASPCA is there to help you. And I didn't do that as fact. I did that for my farm. So it wasn't like I had, yeah, well, it didn't really make any difference. Either way, it would have been fine. But anyway, just wanted to say that.
So again, I just can't stress this enough. We like to have fun when we do it. And it is just such an impactful way to help us really make a shift towards the food and farm system that we want to see. So again, if you can, would love to have you sign up so that we can follow up with you and help set up some of those meetings with your elected officials. And with that, I think we can move to questions and answers.
All right, so while you guys are formulating your questions, I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll that we do. This really helps us when it comes to getting money for our webinars, so that we can keep them free, which is what we really want to do. And Catherine, that picture of you is so adorable. I love it with your dog.
Thanks.
And somebody asked if my op-ed got published. It did. It was like in 2023. It was with the Charlotte Observer in North Carolina. So yeah, it was actually really fun. And all my customers saw that I'd done it, and then they wrote in, and it was just a cool experience. Anyway.
You didn't mention that Sam submitted a letter to the editor. The paper got it and said, this is
that's right.
Interesting. We want you to write a longer piece on this in op-ed form. So she became a proper author.
Yeah, it was so cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's while you guys are answering that poll, let's go to the first question we have. I know this is about federal policy, but is there any sign that factory farms are changing their animal raising practices in response to consumer demand? Is there progress here, and are companies, for example, still using gestation crates at the same rate they have for the last few decades? And if there has been progress, is there any chance that the crates might be regulated out at the request of the industry? There's a lot in that question to unwrap. Thank you, Carrie.
I can give it a first go. I think overall, even though they are doing it slowly, the industry is responding to consumer demand, specifically in kind of the cage and crate area. That's come from pretty much two different buckets. In the beginning of the cage-free movement, a lot of that was corporate campaigns aimed at companies asking them to commit to phasing out cages and crates by a certain year. 2025 actually coming up upon us very quickly is the year that a lot of those companies committed to at the beginning. Some of them have met their commitments and met them years ago, especially in the egg space. The egg industry is an example of one that gave in pretty quickly. They kind of saw the writing on the wall that folks didn't want laying hens kept in battery cages so small they can't even fully spread their wings, and have made a lot of progress in moving the overall market to cage-free. It's actually something that the USDA now tracks. It's big enough and important enough to the industry that they are making big strides. The pork industry, on the other hand, has been really dragging their feet on gestation crates. We mentioned Proposition 12, which is California's law banning the sale of products coming in from those caged and crated systems. And the pork industry has fought that tooth and nail. They were the one that brought the litigation all the way up to the Supreme Court, trying to overturn the California law. They lost, and now that is why we're seeing the EATS Act. They are doing everything they can to keep pigs in gestation crates. But hopefully, California's Prop 12 is fully in effect. It has been for almost a year now. nothing horrible has happened. They spoke of, the great bacon shortage and Californians would never have bacon again and chaos in the marketplace. And that's not what's happening. So hopefully the longer that state laws like that are in effect, the less room that they have to continue to complain, and we'll just see them moving. And there's great, bigger companies out there, like Nyman Ranch is one that started off small. It is now big. It's been acquired by Purdue. They recognize the value of a value-added company like that. So I do think we're seeing progress, and there are still states, every year we're passing more legislation banning confinement in some way at the state level. So I think the hope is that as more and more states commit to that, eventually we could see federal policy that just prohibits cages and crates. So yeah, I think that answered mostly all the questions in there, but we are seeing progress. Again, some industries are pushing back more than others, but definite progress. You're muted, Sam. You're still very muted, Sam.
Sorry. I've got the Q&A over my face, so I can't see. I'm not seeing anything. I said, good question, Carrie, and thank you for answering it, Cara, is what I said. All right. Iris asks, when the elected officials are not favorable to inhumane farming or climate smart technologies, our concerns aren't heard or are opposed. How then do you get a compromise?
Yeah, that's a great question, Iris. And I know that's something that feels, a lot of times it feels so frustrating when you have a conversation with an elected official and it just feels like you're getting the brush off or maybe just lip service. We have to think about how we really kind of show the broad support and popularity of more humane farming systems. And I think there's a number of ways that we can do that. One is, just again, getting more farmers like yourself together to show those elected officials how many folks are engaged in a more humane system of farming, right? Showing them that their actions on policies like the Farm Bill or climate smart technologies would benefit family farmers in their district. Being one of the, again, I go back to one of the best ways to do that is to actually get them out to your farm. So I think we just have to look at kind of varying our tactics and looking for new ways to persuade some of those elected officials if they're not hearing us from the email, from the phone call, from the Zoom meeting, or from meeting them in Washington, D.C. It's actually kind of building relationships. I think a lot of times it can be building relationships with key staffers in their office. And then that can lead to, sending in an invitation for that elected official to come out to your farm and take a look and see those humane practices that you're using, or the climate practices that you're using, and how beneficial they are. Because then we can tie that directly to the policies that support that, and the policies that would negatively impact farms like yours. And that I just firmly believe that putting your face, a human face on these issues, in addition to the animal faces, is one of the best ways to start swaying their mind and to build those bridges for compromise.
Thank you, Adam. Tammy, I think this is more of a comment, but it has a little bit of a question in there. Many organic small farmers are trapped in cities with no right to farm policy. I have legislation proposal to provide a RTF for all working farms in certified agriculture districts. Can you please help me meet legislators who can help protect our small, I lost it. Oops, sorry. The next chat came up and knocked it out of there. Okay, sorry. We have small organic working farms from being shut down. We're targeted by developers who want our farms cheap.
An attempt to respond to that. I think, obviously, Tammy, I don't know what state you're in, but actually most states, in fact, I believe all 50 have some form of right to farm law already on the books. So even just checking into what your state's looks like might be worth seeing what's there already. But actually what comes to mind for me, what we find is most helpful for farms, particularly that it sounds like are in land that is near cities and is therefore becoming much more valuable for development, It's less the right to farm protections that they need, because those are more aimed at protecting farms from nuisance litigation from their neighbors, which might not be the issue for like a small organic farm, which probably isn't, it's not a CAFO that's putting out a lot of, noxious smells or anything like that, but it's just simply affording taxes and all the things that are happening around them as that land gets more valuable. Is that conservation easements might actually be the thing to be looking into. That's how a lot of farms end up keeping land in farming and making that land affordable, both for themselves in the moment, but for the farmers in the future. So that's worth looking into. But either way, you're welcome to email Adam or I, and we can help dig in on that. And Sam can probably share our emails as a follow-up.
Do you want to put them in the chat?
We can do that too.
And then I will also share them in the follow-up. And Cindy has more of a comment, which I think is actually worth talking about for a second, because I think this is very interesting. Did you see that, Adam? Do you want to read it out, Adam?
Sure. So yeah, Cindy's question, bit philosophical question. I'm opposed to CAFOs, but also know that we're nowhere near having enough pasture-based farm operations to support the demand. How do you envision the future looking ideally, supporting the meat demand while also treating all livestock with humane practices? This is a great question, and it goes straight to the heart of an argument that we hear from industry lobbyists all the time, right? Is that we have to feed the world. There's a protein shortage, things like that. And I agree with you 100%, Cindy, is that it is going to take time, right? We didn't get to where we are with the number of CAFOs and factory farms that we have across the country overnight. It's really happened over the last 30 years. And so it's going to take time to transition out. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to think about at ASPCA and working with FACT to think about, is that it's going to take time to transition. There was one of those policies that I mentioned as a marker bill for the Farm Bill, and it's called the Industrial Ag Conversion Act. It's been introduced in both the House and the Senate, and it would provide funding for farmers who were engaged in those CAFO operations to transition their farms over time, right? And so it provides a lifeline, it provides a way out so that they can adopt more humane practices. There's also, just kind of the recognition. So I live in Iowa, and Iowa is, I'm blanking on the exact number of acres, but it's essentially it's about half and half monoculture corn and monoculture soy. A lot of that grain, a lot of that corn, well over about 40% of it's going to ethanol. But then the other majority of that corn is used as cheap feed inside CAFOs. If we weren't raising all of that corn, we could actually transition some of this great fertile Iowa farmland that we have back to prairie style pasture and actually get those animals out of the CAFOs and back on the land. So it's going to take time to actually change the way that folks think and to re-educate on the benefits of higher welfare systems of raising our farm animals, and then actually starting to give farmers a way, an avenue to transition their farms. And the IACA is one of those bills, again, at a policy level that can help us do that. I think the other thing that really helps us do that is farmers talking with other farmers in their community. Because a lot of times some farmers that I know, again, in Iowa, they've been taught for the last 30 years that CAFOs are the only way to do this. And so it takes a lot of education, and maybe I'm not the best person. Maybe it's the farmer just a couple miles down the road who's talking to them and kind of having these conversations. So again, it's why it's important that we build a network of folks like you all so that we're working on it both at the policy level and the community level.
And one thing that ASPCA has done with FACT this year is we have 2 different grant types this year. We have the animal welfare grants, and then we also have a systems change grant for $10,000, and we're handing out one of those. This is our pilot year. So if the goal of that is for farmers who were raising their animals in confinement or in a static housing situation to be able to move their animals onto pasture. And looking at, there's lots of different ways you can do that. You can get a feasibility, pay for feasibility, pay for marketing, and a bunch of different ways that you can make that work. And if you want to know more about that, you can go to our website or you can email me. And Carrie says, also pasture-based farms can educate consumers because they meet the farmers and come to the farms, and then the consumers can become politically active over this issue. And that's actually what I found with that op-ed that I wrote when I shared it with my customers in my newsletter. Then there was also a call to action that came from Cara shortly after that, signing on to some, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I know a bunch of my customers signed on to it just because they trust me and they wanted to support me, and it was a beautiful thing. Okay, doesn't look like we have any more questions. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for a second. So our scholarships and our conferences are currently open. They are always open. We've got the short courses still, and we've got more webinars coming up, a lot of exciting stuff coming up. Our mentorship program is actually, it says it will open November 4th. It has opened because November 4th is in the past. And our Fund to Farmer grants are opening. A huge thank you to Adam and Cara. You guys are always amazing, and I always get super excited, and it's like I want to do all the things, and I want to go talk to people, and I want to help you guys change the food system. I think it's amazing. And everybody who's out there, we were a small group today, but it was an absolutely fantastic group, and I loved what you guys shared. And yeah, reach out to Cara and Shannon, Cara and Adam if you're interested in doing more advocacy. And you can also let me know if you're interested in being part of this network that ASPCA and FACT are pulling together. Yeah, thank you everybody so much. And I'm just going to say goodbye for now. And we won't have another webinar until December. So I'll see you guys again in December. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, Cara. Thank you, Adam. Bye-bye, everybody.